Night settles gently upon an ancient land, its silence deep and deliberate. A silver moon rises above ruined towers, pouring light upon stones that have long forgotten the sound of prayer. Wind sighs through hollow windows, whispering names erased from time, names of knights, kings and dreamers who once swore oaths under heaven's watch. Among the relics scattered across the earth, one symbol remains unbroken, the coiled dragon devouring its own tail. To those who still seek meaning in forgotten legends, that emblem speaks of a promise older than empires, a fire that once bound men to something greater than themselves. Through the centuries, the dragon has been called many things: guardian, monster, angel, curse. Yet long before it became the creature of fear and fantasy, it was a symbol of divine purpose. Its wings once shadowed the shields of kings, its image engraved upon armor, worn not for conquest, but for faith. Beneath that sign, a brotherhood arose, an order so secret and sacred that even the church could scarcely name it. They called themselves Societas Draconistarum, the Order of the Dragon, and their vows echoed through both scripture and blood. The story begins in the waning light of the Middle Ages, when faith trembled and kingdoms fractured. Europe lay wounded by plague, divided by ambition, and threatened by empires rising from the east. Amid this turmoil, a single king sought to unite the broken pieces of Christendom beneath one divine vision. His name was Sigismund of Luxembourg, and the mark he left upon history was carved not in stone, but in fire. From his dream would emerge a brotherhood sworn to eternity, bound by an oath that would outlive both crown and cross. Legends say the knights gathered in candlelit halls, cloaked in silence, as the king placed before them a golden seal engraved with the image of the dragon. One by one, they swore to defend the faith, as dragons fight serpents, their voices blending into a single vow that would change the course of nations. To those who bore its mark, the dragon was not a beast, but a mirror, reflecting courage, fury, and sacrifice. To wear it was to accept both glory and doom, for its fire burned all who carried it. Centuries later, that same symbol would rise again, not upon shields or banners, but within the pages of legend. From its shadow would emerge one of the most haunting figures in all of history, a prince, a warrior, and a man whose name would become immortal through both terror and fascination. His story began with the same oath, whispered beneath the same emblem, and his bloodline would carry its mark until the world learned to call him by another name: Dracula. So let the night fall around you. Let the voice of history guide your thoughts, and the flicker of imagination illuminate what time has concealed. You are standing at the threshold of an ancient tale, a journey through faith, fire, and darkness. If stories like this awaken your curiosity for the mysteries of the past, remember to subscribe to the channel, give this film a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice keeps these legends alive, carrying the dragon's flame into the present. Clouds drifted low across the continent, veiling a land divided by faith, greed, and fear. The first light of the 15th century found Europe restless and weary. Kingdoms once united by banners of holy purpose now eyed each other with suspicion. Plague had carved scars deep into the hearts of cities, leaving empty streets and silent chapels where prayers had once echoed. The smell of incense mixed with the bitter memory of ash, and every sunrise seemed to promise both hope and ruin. Across the plains, peasants tilled soil that no longer yielded mercy, while nobles plotted beneath vaulted ceilings adorned with fading saints. Beyond the Carpathian Mountains, winds from the east carried whispers of conquest. The Ottoman Empire had begun to move with the patience of a serpent, coiling its influence across the Balkans, consuming fortresses and faith alike. To the west, kings watched the horizon with unease, uncertain whether the advancing crescent was a punishment for their corruption or a test of divine will. In the taverns of Buda and Prague, men spoke of distant crusades and of a darkness creeping ever closer, not as a shadow cast by men, but as something older, hungrier, almost inevitable. Underneath gilded cathedrals, relics glimmered behind locked doors, guarded not by soldiers but by superstition. Monks copied ancient texts by candlelight, recording both history and omen. They wrote of prophecies foretelling an age when faith would falter and dragons would rise again, not as beasts, but as symbols of men sworn to fire and purity. Across Europe, visions spread like wildfire, dreams of burning skies, rivers turned red, and a single banner bearing the image of a coiled serpent guarding the cross. Among the great courts, alliances shifted like desert sands. The Holy Roman Empire struggled to hold its dominion together, while France licked its wounds from wars that had drained its spirit. England, bound by its own disputes, remained distant from the rising storm. And yet, between these kingdoms, a quiet understanding took root that the true battle would not be waged upon fields of glory, but in the hearts of those who still believed in divine duty. In the monasteries, priests whispered of Psalm 18, verse 34, "He trains my hands for battle, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze." To many it felt less like scripture and more like a warning. The faith that had once united Europe was now fractured into pride and fear. The papal throne itself was wrapped in intrigue, its authority challenged by kings who no longer trembled before its decrees. The cross, once a symbol of mercy, had become a standard of war. Travelers who crossed from Hungary into Wallachia spoke of borderlands haunted by strange symbols and fierce lords who trusted neither west nor east. Those lands were a crucible caught between the might of the Sultan and the pride of Christian kings. Castles stood upon cliffs like silent sentinels, their torches burning against an ever-approaching night. To live in those places was to live with one hand upon a sword and one heart upon a prayer. Faith itself became a battlefield. Where the church failed to bring unity, secret brotherhoods emerged, blending the old codes of knighthood with the mysticism of forgotten ages. Rumors spread of rituals conducted in the dead of night, where oaths were sworn not only to God, but to the eternal flame of the dragon, an emblem of both wrath and redemption. Those who sought order in chaos began to gather, drawn by a single idea, that light must sometimes take the form of fire to hold back the dark. History remembers the kings who ruled and the wars they waged, yet few recall the silent movements beneath their reigns. In the shadows of cathedrals, men of faith and fear conspired to create something enduring, something that would outlive kingdoms and emperors alike. As the crescent continued its march across the Balkans, Europe trembled not merely for its borders, but for its soul. The world had begun to shift, and those who felt it knew that an age of dragons was about to return. Amidst this turmoil rose a king whose vision stretched beyond the reach of his crown. Sigismund of Luxembourg, ruler of Hungary and heir to imperial destiny, gazed upon a fractured world and sought to bind it through faith and flame. In the winter of 1408, within the stone walls of his court in Buda, he gathered his closest allies, noblemen, warriors, and priests, and presented an idea that would soon transcend politics and become legend. He spoke of a brotherhood not born of blood, but of purpose. Its members would stand as dragons before the serpents of the East, defenders of the cross against those who threatened it. The order's symbol, a dragon devouring its tail, was chosen not merely for its power, but for its meaning. It spoke of eternity, of unity without end, of divine wrath turned against corruption. To bear it was to accept a sacred burden, to fight without hesitation, to believe without question. Those first oaths were whispered beneath flickering candles, the air heavy with incense and secrecy. The men gathered there were bound by loyalty to their king, and by a deeper calling they could scarcely name. They signed their vows in Latin, sealing them with wax, pressed by the dragon's signet. The ceremony was not recorded in open chronicles. It was remembered only in the trembling of voices and the glimmer of steel that reflected both fear and faith. Sigismund's intent was not merely to create another knighthood. He sought to restore something long lost, a sense of divine order, a return to the sanctity that once guided kings and crusaders. Yet even as his words carried the weight of heaven, the men who followed him felt an undertone they could not deny. The dragon was not a creature of pure light. It carried the memory of ancient fires, older than scripture, older than man. From Hungary, the idea spread quickly. Noble houses across Central and Eastern Europe sent their sons to swear the oath. Hungary, Poland, Serbia, and Wallachia became linked by invisible chains of allegiance. The Order of the Dragon grew in silence, its influence reaching into courts, monasteries, and battlefields. Banners began to appear bearing the mark, a coiled serpent crowned with the cross, seen by allies as a beacon of courage and by enemies as a sign of death. The chroniclers who later wrote of this time spoke in reverent tones. They called it the last great crusade of Europe, though no trumpet announced its birth. It moved through whispers and symbols, its members known to one another by signs carved into rings and crests. They spoke of God, yet many felt that something deeper bound them together, something older than the churches they swore to protect. The dragon, in their prayers, was not merely a beast of destruction. It represented divine strength, the consuming fire of righteousness that cleansed corruption from within. To fight beneath its image was to embrace both the fury of heaven and the darkness it opposed. It was a paradox the knights carried with pride, holy warriors who walked perilously close to the shadows they sought to destroy. Sigismund stood at their head, a figure both king and prophet, bearing the weight of his creation. His eyes reflected the dual flame of his order, part glory, part obsession. To him, the dragon was not a symbol of menace, but of balance, chaos bound by faith, strength tempered by obedience. Yet, in the depths of his heart, even he must have known that such power would one day slip beyond mortal control. The snow that fell that winter seemed to hush the world outside the halls of Buda, as if the heavens themselves were listening. The first brotherhood of the dragon had been born, not from peace, but from the edge of despair. And in the silence that followed, beneath the flicker of sacred flame, the shadow of destiny began to move. Crowned by light, yet haunted by his own creation, Sigismund of Luxembourg strode through history as both visionary and conqueror. His reign was a mosaic of contradictions, devotion interlaced with pride, wisdom entwined with suspicion. To his followers, he was chosen by God to restore unity to Christendom. To his rivals, a manipulator cloaked in righteousness. He believed the world could be reshaped through his will, that divine order might once again guide mortal men. Born into privilege, educated among scholars and soldiers, Sigismund saw in every challenge an opportunity for greatness. The wars of his youth hardened him, the intrigues of his court sharpened his cunning. He learned early that faith alone could not hold empires together. It required fear, and the dragon became his instrument of both. Beneath his seal, kings swore allegiance, not out of love, but out of awe. He moved them as pieces upon a board that stretched across Europe. Even those closest to him struggled to discern where his faith ended and his ambition began. He prayed with monks in the stillness of dawn, yet his mind never ceased to scheme. Each alliance he forged carried a hidden edge. When he looked upon the symbol of the dragon, he did not see only devotion, he saw power harnessed, bound in ritual and flame. For Sigismund, control over such a force meant control over the hearts of men themselves. Court chroniclers described him as a man with eyes that never rested, always searching the horizon for signs of destiny. He trusted few, feared none, and demanded obedience without question. Yet those who stood beside him in council spoke of moments when his voice softened, when he spoke not as a ruler but as a man burdened by visions. He often recited Psalm 144, verse 1, "Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." To him these words were not prayer, but prophecy. His wife, Queen Barbara of Chile, shared neither his faith nor his restraint. Known for her intelligence and unorthodox interests, she was rumored to dabble in the arcane. Many whispered that her influence deepened Sigismund's fascination with the hidden, drawing him towards symbols and secrets that the Church would have forbidden. Together they became a figurehead of dual power, king and queen surrounded by loyal knights, bound by both piety and mystery. As his dominion grew, so did his unease. Every victory felt hollow, every peace fleeting. The more he tried to unite Christendom, the more divided it became. Allies betrayed one another, and even within the order, whispers began to rise. Some questioned whether their leader sought salvation for his soul or immortality for his name. Sigismund's gaze, once lifted toward heaven, began to linger upon the shadows of his own making. He expanded the order's reach into lands far beyond his own, inviting princes and dukes to join the cause. Yet the more power he granted them, the more autonomy they claimed. What began as a sacred brotherhood slowly took on the shape of a political machine, a network of ambition cloaked in faith. The dragon that was meant to serve became a creature that demanded to be fed. In the grand halls of Buda, beneath stained glass that shimmered with scenes of angels and martyrs, Sigismund would often stand alone, tracing the lines of the dragon carved into his throne. The creature's endless circle fascinated him, a symbol of eternity that both promised and mocked him. He longed for his name to echo beyond death, not merely as a king, but as the architect of an immortal idea. History remembers him as a ruler both brilliant and dangerous, a man who sought to bind heaven and earth under one vision. He wielded symbols as weapons, faith as strategy, and secrecy as armor. Yet the deeper his order grew, the less it belonged to him. Beneath its noble vows, beneath the banners of purity, something ancient stirred, something that even Sigismund could not command. Beneath vaulted ceilings where candlelight danced like living flame, the chosen gathered to seal their devotion in ritual. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and burning resin, a fragrance meant to purify, yet carrying the weight of mystery. A circle of knights stood in silence, each clad in dark velvet and steel, their eyes reflecting both reverence and apprehension. At the center stood a stone altar, upon which rested a sword, its blade engraved with the image of a serpent swallowing its own tail. To touch that weapon was to surrender to something greater than flesh and pride. It was to bind one's soul to eternity. Words of the oath were not written in books, nor spoken aloud in the presence of the uninitiated. They were murmured in Latin, carried from one generation to another through memory and fear. Those who took the vow promised to stand against the enemies of Christ, to protect the innocent, and to obey their sovereign without hesitation. Yet beneath these noble declarations lay deeper promises, those whispered in shadows. invoking powers that reached beyond scripture. The knights swore to fight as dragons fight serpents, a phrase that stirred unease even in the hearts of priests who blessed their blades. Ceremonies were performed in secrecy, often beneath the foundations of cathedrals or within remote fortresses guarded by mountain mists. Torches flickered against the faces of men who knew they would never be the same once they spoke the words. As the blood of each initiate touched the altar's stone, the oath was sealed not in ink, but in sacrifice. It was said that the first heat of that sacred iron could burn through sin itself, leaving only faith and duty behind. Across the lands of Hungary and Transylvania, tales began to spread of these midnight rites. Travelers whispered of knights who wore rings etched with coiled dragons, of voices that echoed through chapels long after the doors were locked. Peasants crossing the roads at dusk claimed to have seen the red glow of torches upon distant hills, and they crossed themselves, uncertain whether such gatherings served God or something older. Even among the clergy, debates arose. Some saw the order as divine instruments of providence, others feared they courted forces mankind was not meant to wield. Each knight carried not only the sigil of the dragon, but the weight of its meaning. The Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, symbolized both life and death, creation and destruction, an unending cycle. To Sigismund, this represented eternal vigilance, the unbroken circle of faith. Yet to those who gazed too long upon it, the symbol whispered of darker truths, that power feeds upon itself, that purity devours its own reflection. When battle called, the knights rode beneath banners marked by crimson scales, their armor glinting like molten metal beneath the sun. They fought with a fervor that frightened even their allies. Chronicles tell of warriors who advanced through fire and arrow as though shielded by unseen strength. Whether it was faith or something unspoken that guided their hands, no chronicler dared to guess. Behind their victories lay a silence that lingered long after the clamor of battle ceased. The oath also bound them in death. Those who fell upon the field were buried without inscription, their graves marked only by small iron crosses engraved with the dragon. To be forgotten was part of the covenant, for glory belonged not to men but to the eternal flame they served. In their anonymity, they achieved immortality. The Brothers of the Dragon became both myth and memory, their existence blending into the folds of legend. Whispers claimed that even kings feared to break faith with the order, for betrayal invited ruin. Those who turned against their vows often vanished, their lands swallowed by rebellion or plague. Whether coincidence or divine retribution, few dared test the strength of that curse. Sigismund himself was said to keep fragments of parchment hidden within his crown, verses of scripture mixed with symbols no priest could interpret. Over time, the rituals of the order deepened, layered with meanings only initiates could grasp. The dragon ceased to be a mere emblem of strength and became an emblem of duality, devourer and guardian, chaos and discipline, mortality and eternity. Every oath spoken beneath its image carried both salvation and peril. Each knight who knelt before that sigil knew that his life no longer belonged to himself, but to the fire that never slept. Even now, centuries later, scholars studying the remnants of the order speak of those vows in hushed tones. The dragon's oath was more than a pledge of loyalty. It was an invocation, a merging of sacred duty with the raw hunger for transcendence. Faith alone could not explain the fervor of those who bore its mark. Something older had been awakened, and through those words it continued to breathe. When dawn fell upon the kingdoms bound by the dragon's covenant, its mark began to weave itself into the very fabric of Europe. Cloaks of crimson and black bore the coiled serpent, shields carried it into battle, rings sealed royal decrees in wax. The sight of that emblem stirred reverence and dread in equal measure. It became a language understood without words, a promise of loyalty to Sigismund's vision and a silent warning to his enemies. Those who wore it carried more than a symbol. They bore a secret flame upon their souls. In the courts of Buda, Vienna, and Belgrade, noblemen displayed the dragon upon their garments as a sign of privilege, yet few understood the full cost of its meaning. To the uninitiated, it appeared as an honor granted by the crown. To the brothers themselves, it was an ever-watchful eye. The insignia demanded conduct befitting divine service. Those who disgraced it invited the wrath of their brethren and the shame of exile. Among whispers, it was said that the mark could not simply be worn, it had to be lived. Stories spread of knights whose armor bore scratches resembling scales, as though the creature itself had claimed them. Chroniclers wrote that the dragon's influence could be felt in the presence of its servants, a subtle unease that turned courage into trembling. Even the enemies of Christendom came to recognize it. Ottoman scouts who encountered banners bearing the dragon often fled before combat, claiming they had seen the eyes of fire staring from behind the European lines. Sigismund used this fear as his weapon. He adorned his personal standard with the emblem, gilded in gold and bordered by black silk. When he entered battle, his army followed that symbol as though it were divine protection. The dragon became a manifestation of faith that transcended borders, rallying both knights and peasants beneath one purpose. Yet as its influence spread, the symbol began to take on meanings beyond the king's control. Among the nobility, the mark became a sign of inheritance, passed from father to son. Families who joined the order displayed the dragon upon their coats of arms, etching it into stone above the gates of their castles. To outsiders, it was a mark of prestige. Within the brotherhood, it represented lineage, a continuation of the sacred bond that stretched back to that first gathering in Buda. Across the decades, its design evolved. Some depicted the dragon crowned, others entwined with the cross, others still devouring its tail in endless hunger. As the image multiplied, so too did its interpretations. To certain scholars, the dragon symbolized resurrection, the victory of divine fire over darkness. To mystics, it hinted at secrets far older than Christianity itself, echoes of forgotten cults where dragons guarded thresholds between worlds. Within the ranks of the order, these meanings intertwined, creating a tapestry of belief where religion and myth could no longer be separated. Wherever the mark appeared, power followed. Those who bore it were granted influence in courts and councils, their words weighted with the authority of faith. Yet such privilege demanded loyalty that bordered on servitude. Betrayal of the dragon's code was met not with forgiveness, but with obliteration. Lands confiscated, names erased, bloodlines extinguished. The punishment for disloyalty was total. The mark that once bestowed honor became the instrument of judgment. Rumors claimed that during secret gatherings the dragon's emblem was not merely worn, but illuminated by flame, the fire reflecting in the eyes of its bearers until it seemed the beast itself lived through them. Chroniclers of the time described the sensation as both holy and terrifying. Even the most faithful knights spoke of dreams where the dragon coiled around their hearts, whispering in tongues they could not understand. Whether metaphor or memory, none could escape its hold once the symbol was taken. The influence of that insignia reached far beyond the battlefield. It appeared carved upon church altars, engraved upon relics, and hidden within manuscripts that combined scripture with cipher. To many, it became a bridge between mortal duty and divine mystery. For others, it was a reminder that power always demands sacrifice. Behind every ornate crest and jeweled medallion lay the echo of the oath, silent, eternal, and consuming. Long after Sigismund's death, the dragon continued to gleam upon armor and parchment, its eyes still watching across centuries. The men who once swore by it vanished, yet their mark endured, etched into the memory of nations. It no longer belonged to one king, one faith, or one generation. It had become something greater, an idea woven into the very soul of Europe, whispering of power that neither time nor death could fully erase. When the Order's influence spread beyond Hungary's borders, it wove itself into the veins of noble houses like an unbroken thread of fire. Princes and lords from far-flung realms sought to claim kinship with the dragon, not merely for faith, but for the prestige it carried. Hungary, Poland, Serbia, Bohemia, and Wallachia all found themselves entangled in its unseen web. What began as a brotherhood of conviction became a network of dynastic alliances that would shape the course of history. In the courts of Eastern Europe, allegiance to the dragon became a seal of legitimacy. Kings offered it as reward, knights sought it as validation, and bloodlines carried it as inheritance. Marriages were arranged between families of the order, their unions symbolizing both political strategy and sacred continuity. Each crest bearing the dragon's likeness became more than decoration. It was an heirloom, a covenant passed through generations. To lose it meant disgrace. To guard it was to uphold the sanctity of the past. Among the Hungarian magnates, loyalty to Sigismund was both honor and burden. The order demanded absolute obedience, yet it also granted influence rivaling that of the crown itself. Councils filled with men wearing the dragon's insignia began to dictate matters of faith and war. Beneath the surface, rivalries brewed between those who saw the order as a spiritual calling and those who viewed it as a means to consolidate power. The dragon's flame burned brightly, but ambition fanned it into dangerous sparks. In Serbia and Wallachia, the emblem took on an even darker glow. Border princes who lived under constant threat from the Ottomans adopted the mark as both defiance and plea. To them, the dragon was protector and avenger, the spirit of a Europe that refused to bow. Their loyalty to the order was both political and deeply personal, for they stood upon the very frontier between two worlds, Christian and Muslim, light and shadow. Through marriage and blood, the symbol crossed frontiers. Families in Transylvania and Moldavia forged bonds with the great houses of Hungary and Bohemia, uniting under a single creed. The dragon became both shield and chain, linking men who might otherwise have been enemies. Behind every alliance lay the echo of Sigismund's original vision, now distorted by time, yet still potent enough to command reverence. Among these families, one lineage stood apart, a dynasty that would bear the dragon's mark not only upon its banners, but within its very name. The princes of Wallachia, fierce guardians of their mountainous realm, accepted the oath with pride. Their lands lay closest to the advancing Ottoman frontier, and for them the dragon was no mere symbol, but a promise of survival. To their people, the coiled serpent upon their crests meant protection. To their enemies, it meant fury unleashed. As the decades unfolded, the Order's influence began to weave myths around these bloodlines. Chroniclers wrote of children born beneath comets, of rulers who dreamed of dragons before ascending the throne. Whether coincidence or crafted legend, such tales gave the impression that divine favor itself flowed through these families. Peasants prayed in their names, soldiers fought beneath their banners, and whispers grew that the blood of the dragon ran through their veins. In foreign courts, ambassadors from these regions carried tokens bearing the sigil, rings, pendants, and seals that commanded respect, even among distant kings. The emblem became a form of silent diplomacy, an unspoken language understood by all who valued the old codes of honor. Yet behind the grandeur of these symbols lay tension and deceit. Each noble who swore to the dragon swore also to Sigismund's legacy, even after the king's death. The oath had outlived its maker, and its chains still bound those who carried it. Those who defied its authority found misfortune close behind. Rebellions collapsed without reason. Heirs fell ill without cause. Lands once fertile turned barren. To the faithful, such calamities were divine punishment. To the skeptical, they were coincidence amplified by superstition. Yet no one dared test it twice. The dragon demanded allegiance, and it received it through awe or through fear. In time, the order's bloodlines became indistinguishable from the kingdoms they ruled. Their sigils carved into stone, their oaths etched into law, they shaped the political map of Eastern Europe for generations. Beneath their palaces and chapels lay the memory of that first vow, the one that bound them all beneath a single mark. The dragon no longer belonged to one monarch or one creed. It had become a lineage, a living inheritance that flowed through veins like molten fire, waiting for the moment when it would rise again. Beyond the rolling plains of Hungary and the fortified castles of Transylvania stretched a land untamed, carved by mountains and shadows. Wallachia lay between two worlds, a rugged border realm where the winds carried both hymns and war cries. Its valleys were lined with forests so ancient that travelers claimed to hear whispers in the leaves, voices older than the faith that ruled men's hearts. Beneath those forests, rivers wound like veins of silver, reflecting the stars as if heaven itself leaned closer to witness the struggles below. Life here was harsh, carved by sword and survival. Faith served as shield, yet superstition ruled the night. Rulers of this land lived with constant peril. To the south, the Ottoman Empire grew relentless, pressing against Wallachia's borders like a tide that would not recede. To the north and west stood Christian monarchs, their promises of alliance often as fragile as parchment. Between these forces, the princes of Wallachia walked a narrow path, compelled to bend, yet refusing to break. Their loyalty was tested by both the cross and the crescent, their very existence a testament to endurance. Sigismund's gaze eventually turned toward these mountain lords, recognizing in them both ferocity and devotion. He saw in Wallachia a key to Christendom's defense, a wall of warriors who would rather die than kneel. His emissaries rode into the courts of these voivodes, carrying not only treaties but invitations. To stand with the Order of the Dragon was to stand within the king's circle of fire, and for a land forever caught between empires, that promise carried weight. In the early 15th century, Wallachia's rulers faced turmoil unlike any other. Blood feuds, rival claimants, and Ottoman incursions left the throne unstable. Yet amidst the chaos rose one man whose name would echo across generations, Vlad of the House of Basarab, later known as Vlad II Dracula. Through his allegiance to Sigismund, the dragon symbol crossed the Carpathians, embedding itself into the heart of Wallachian destiny. The oath, once sworn in the halls of Buda, now found new breath in the mountain citadels of Târgoviște and Curtea de Argeș. Beneath banners marked by the coiled dragon, Wallachian soldiers fought not only for survival, but for legacy. They were few compared to the might of the Ottoman armies, yet their courage was bound by faith and fear in equal measure. Chronicles from the time speak of battles fought by torchlight, of warriors who painted the dragon's mark upon their shields before charging into the fray. To them, it was more than allegiance, it was a spiritual armor. The arrival of the dragon's creed did not replace Wallachia's ancient traditions. Rather, it merged with them, creating something new and untamed. Local legends of serpents and spirits found resonance in the order's symbol, blending pagan memory with Christian zeal. Priests blessed the banners of the dragon, while villagers whispered prayers that mixed Latin with the old tongue. It was faith reborn in the fire of necessity, both holy and haunting. Under Vlad II's leadership, the bond between Wallachia and Hungary deepened. The prince pledged loyalty to Sigismund, vowing to defend his land and uphold the dragon's ideals. Yet, even as alliances strengthened, shadows gathered. To rule in Wallachia meant living with betrayal lurking at every banquet and daggers hidden behind every promise. The very symbol meant to unite men often divided them, for with power came envy, and with faith came fear. Those who visited Vlad's court spoke of tapestries embroidered with the dragon, of soldiers who swore their oaths before a carved image of the beast entwined with a cross. Every ritual, every gesture reflected duality, protection and vengeance, devotion and defiance. For the Wallachians, the dragon was no longer merely a royal emblem. It had become the spirit of their land, fierce, coiled, and ever watchful. The mountains surrounding their realm stood as both fortress and tomb. Many who crossed their passes seeking conquest found only death within the mists. Yet within those same heights a legend was forming, one that would pass from father to son through generations bound by blood and fire. The dragon had found a new home, and through it, history was about to give birth to a legacy that would never sleep. Vlad of Wallachia entered the Chronicles of Kings not as a conqueror, but as a survivor. His life unfolded in the space between empires, his crown balanced upon the edge of a blade. To Sigismund of Luxembourg, he was both ally and disciple, a man worthy of bearing the sacred insignia of the dragon. When the king extended his hand and welcomed him into the brotherhood, Vlad accepted without hesitation. From that moment forward, he carried the title Dracula, the dragon. For a ruler surrounded by treachery, the alliance offered both strength and sanctity. Membership in the order elevated Vlad above neighboring princes, granting him prestige and protection. Yet it also bound him to a web of obligations that stretched across borders. Every campaign, every decision, every oath was watched by both allies and adversaries. The dragon's mark was honor, but it was also scrutiny. Those who bore it were expected to embody the fire of faith, no matter how fiercely the world tried to extinguish it. As voivode, Vlad faced an impossible balance between submission and sovereignty. The Ottoman sultans demanded tribute, threatening invasion should he resist. Sigismund urged defiance, invoking divine purpose and holy duty. Between these powers, Vlad stood alone, a ruler of a small yet fiercely independent realm. He paid tribute when he must, fought when he could, and prayed that his decisions would not bring ruin upon his people. Historians speak of him as pragmatic, shrewd, and cautious, a man who understood that survival required both courage and calculation. Yet beneath his diplomacy burned a deeper fire. The oath to the dragon had awakened in him a sense of destiny, a belief that Wallachia's fate was intertwined with divine struggle. He ruled not only as prince, but as guardian of a border sanctified by blood. Every victory was a prayer answered, every defeat a trial from heaven. Accounts from his court describe a ruler who blended piety with power. Churches were built under his patronage, adorned with symbols of both the cross and the dragon. Priests blessed his banners before battle, and his soldiers swore their vows upon relics said to be fragments of the true cross. Yet behind this visible devotion lay an unspoken tension, the same tension that haunted all who served the order. To defend faith required violence, and violence left stains that prayer could not wash away. Vlad's relationship with Sigismund was marked by loyalty and mutual respect, though distance and politics often tested both. When summoned to join the king's campaigns, Vlad rode beneath the dragon's banner, his armor etched with the same symbol that adorned Sigismund's seal. To fight under that emblem was to fight not merely for Hungary or Christendom, but for an ideal, a union of mortal courage and divine justice. Yet those ideals often faltered against the harsh truth of war. Enemies of Wallachia called Vlad's faith into question, accusing him of opportunism and treachery. But his actions reflected not deceit, but necessity. He ruled a land where survival meant adaptation. The dragon upon his crest did not promise purity, it promised endurance. Whether negotiating with sultans or kings, Vlad carried himself with the calm of one who understood the cost of both loyalty and betrayal. The years of his reign were written in blood and uncertainty. Ottoman raids burned villages, Christian crusades demanded soldiers he could scarcely spare. Yet through famine and invasion, the dragon's fire endured. To his people, Vlad Dracula was both protector and enigma, a ruler whose faith was as sharp as his sword. His eyes, chroniclers noted, burned with an inner intensity, neither cruelty nor mercy, but something older, something that had seen too much. Toward the end of his life, his legacy seemed uncertain. Allies turned distant, enemies grew bold, and the world he had fought to preserve began to crumble. Yet even as his body weakened, his name carried weight. The dragon he served would not die with him. His sons, born of fire and conflict, would carry his mark forward into an age more violent and immortal than his own. From his blood would rise a figure whose name would forever merge with the shadow of the dragon, his son Vlad III. Within the cold halls of Târgoviște, the son of Vlad Dracula grew beneath a sky heavy with omens. Vlad III, the second son of the dragon, was born into a world of betrayal and iron. His cradle was surrounded by maps, swords, and whispers. From the moment he could walk, he was taught to pray before the image of the dragon entwined with the cross, a symbol of faith bound to fury. His childhood was no gentle season of play, but a constant reminder that destiny awaited, sharp as steel and merciless as winter. The boy's tutors were both priests and soldiers. He learned scripture alongside the art of war, memorizing psalms as he practiced with blade and bow. His father's tales of the order filled his nights with visions of knights sworn to divine duty. Yet those stories carried shadows. Vlad III grew to understand that the dragon's fire was both light and torment, a gift that demanded sacrifice. He often stood before the carved sigil that hung above his father's throne, tracing its lines with his eyes, as if seeking to understand the secret that had bound his family to eternity. When he was still a youth, his life changed forever. Political storms swept through Wallachia, and betrayal from within the nobility forced his father into uneasy compromise. To secure fragile peace with the Ottoman Empire, Vlad II sent his sons as hostages to the court of Sultan Murad II. The journey across the Danube marked the boy's first taste of exile. Stripped of his home, surrounded by foreign tongues and strange customs, he faced the world not as a prince, but as a captive, draped in royal expectation. Years spent in Adrianople forged him in ways his father could never have imagined. Under the watchful eyes of the Sultan's tutors, Vlad learned strategy, mathematics, and languages. He was educated among the children of conquerors, taught to respect the power of discipline and fear. Yet deep within him, resentment grew. Each prayer whispered in the dark carried the same words. Psalm 7, verse 9, "Oh, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the just." Those lines became his shield, his rebellion, his quiet fire. The Ottoman court fascinated and repelled him. He admired its order and efficiency, its unyielding will, yet despised the authority that had taken his freedom. He watched executions carried out in perfect silence, saw loyalty and cruelty woven together like threads of the same cloth. From those years of observation, he learned that fear could command obedience more swiftly than love. The lesson settled within him like ember waiting to ignite. News from Wallachia reached him in fragments, his father's struggles, shifting alliances, the endless threat of invasion. When word came that his father had fallen, betrayed by rivals and slain, something within the young prince hardened into stone. His father's title, Dracula, became both inheritance and burden. The dragon's fire, once a symbol of faith, now burned within him as vengeance. He swore that his bloodline would never again kneel before foreign kings or false allies. Years of captivity transformed him into a figure both disciplined and dangerous. When he was finally released, his return to Wallachia was not as a lost son but as a storm. The land he found was divided, its people weary of endless war. Yet in their eyes he saw reflection of his own fury. The dragon's mark had not faded from their banners, it had only grown darker. He gathered his supporters quietly, rebuilding his father's legacy piece by piece, preparing for a reckoning that would shake empires. Observers of that time described him as a man of haunting intensity. His presence commanded silence, his words carried the weight of judgment. Those who met his gaze spoke of something unearthly, an aura of both devotion and menace. The boy who had prayed for justice in captivity now wielded power with terrifying precision. The dragon that once symbolized divine protection had taken on a new aspect: predator, avenger, unyielding guardian of his realm. Through him, the Order's creed found its most fervent disciple. He did not wear the dragon's insignia merely as ornament, he lived it through action and decree. Enemies called him impaler, tyrant, monster, yet to his followers he was justice incarnate. Faith and fury had merged into one will, and from that union emerged a legend that would echo long after his mortal body had turned to dust. The son of the dragon had risen, shaped by fire and fear, into a force neither his father nor his king could have foreseen. Across the restless plains of the Balkans, the air shimmered with tension like heat over steel. Kingdoms prayed for deliverance while armies marched under banners that bore holy symbols, yet fought for ambition as much as faith. Between the gleaming domes of Constantinople and the towering spires of Buda stretched a battlefield, not merely of swords, but of souls. This land had become the crucible of two worlds, one bound by the cross, the other guided by the crescent. Each claimed divine favor, each called the other heretic, and in the spaces between them, villages burned and kings were buried. Crusaders rode under papal blessing, their armor reflecting sunlight as though heaven itself sanctioned their cause. Yet behind their processions lingered the smell of death and the murmur of doubt. The Ottoman hosts that opposed them moved with relentless discipline, their soldiers praying before banners of green silk adorned with sacred verses. Both sides knelt before the same sky, each believing that the wind carried their prayers higher. What lay between them was not only conquest but conviction, a collision of faiths where mercy often drowned beneath waves of righteousness. In the fortresses of Wallachia and Serbia, warriors awoke each morning to the sound of church bells mingling with distant muezzins. The soundscape of the frontier was a chorus of devotion and defiance. Every tower cast its own shadow, every river mirrored a boundary drawn in blood. For generations the people of these lands had known no peace, only intervals between sieges. To live here was to carry both fear and courage as twin burdens, for neither faith offered escape from the sword's judgment. Among the knights of the Order, this struggle was seen as prophecy fulfilled. They believed the dragon's flame had been rekindled, to guard the dying light of Christendom. Sigismund's vision had planted its roots deep in their hearts, and though the king was gone, his legacy endured through oaths spoken in hidden chambers. To them, the advancing empire of the East was not merely an enemy, it was the shadow of an ancient serpent, the same adversary spoken of in Scripture. To fight against it was to reenact a battle as old as creation itself. Yet even as faith sharpened their resolve, doubt crept like frost upon their spirit. The Church in Rome demanded unity, but its decrees often contradicted the realities of war. Crusades were declared, then abandoned. Promises of support arrived too late or not at all. Kings who once fought side by side turned against one another when profit beckoned louder than prayer. The dragon's brotherhood began to fracture beneath the weight of hypocrisy, though its members still clung to the illusion of divine purpose. In Wallachia, Vlad III watched this turmoil with cold precision. He had witnessed both the piety and the deceit of empires. To him, the cross and the crescent were symbols wielded by men who sought dominion, not salvation. His allegiance was to his land and to the unbreakable fire of his will. Yet he knew the balance between faith and fury was delicate. His armies fought in the name of Christ, but their methods spoke of vengeance. His soul stood upon the same precipice as his ancestors, caught between sanctity and damnation. Reports of Ottoman raids reached his court like echoes of thunder. Villages along the Danube vanished in smoke, churches reduced to ash, monasteries plundered. Yet retaliation came swiftly. Vlad's forces struck with a ferocity that terrified even allies. His campaigns blurred the lines between defense and punishment. He saw himself as the dragon's heir, unleashed to purge corruption and protect the sacred. For him, cruelty was not sin, but necessity, a language the enemy understood. Travelers passing through the Balkans spoke of crosses lined with impaled bodies, stretching across fields like grim monuments. To Western chroniclers, these acts were barbaric. To his people, they were warnings written in flesh, messages to empires that Wallachia would never bow. Each stake that rose upon the horizon bore the echo of ancient vows, the same vows that had been whispered in Sigismund's court centuries before. The dragon's war had changed form, but its fire still burned. Faith had become a battlefield without boundaries, a war fought within hearts as fiercely as upon plains. The cross and the crescent no longer represented distant creeds. They were forces entwined in endless struggle, each feeding the other's existence. Amid this storm of belief and blood, the dragon's shadow stretched wider, reminding all who saw it that righteousness and destruction often walked hand in hand. Behind the public pageantry of banners and battlefields lay a world veiled in silence. The Knights of the Order of the Dragon had long guarded secrets that reached beyond their oaths. Their ceremonies were draped in mystery, their words chosen with care, their symbols layered with meanings that even kings could not fully decipher. To join their ranks was to enter a labyrinth where faith and arcana intertwined. For those within, understanding was not given but earned, piece by piece, through trial and revelation. Initiates spoke of hidden texts written in cipher, bound in leather, and sealed with wax imprinted by the dragon's tail. These manuscripts were said to contain codes of conduct, prayers, and diagrams resembling alchemical charts. The lines within them hinted at truths that danced between theology and forbidden knowledge. Scholars centuries later would argue whether these writings represented devotion or heresy, but to the knights who lived by them, they were maps of the spirit, guiding men toward a fire that could either purify or consume. Every ritual held layers unseen by outsiders. The circle formed during initiation was not only a symbol of unity, but a mirror of eternity, reflecting the heavens above and the underworld below. The torchlight that surrounded the altar represented the flame of divine wrath, while the shadows beyond it spoke of human frailty. Even the sword laid before the initiate carried coded meaning. Its crossguard, the symbol of sacrifice, its blade, the path between salvation and damnation. Those who knelt within that light swore oaths that bound their souls far deeper than loyalty to any crown. Legends emerged of a language known only to the Order, a fusion of Latin, Greek, and ancient runes, used to mark correspondence and relics. Those who deciphered its meaning spoke of phrases that invoked both divine and elemental powers. The words ignis eternus appeared frequently, the eternal flame, the same fire believed to dwell within the heart of the dragon. Whether these incantations were metaphor or invocation remained uncertain, yet their repetition in carvings, rings, and seals suggested belief in something beyond mere ceremony. Symbols carved upon their armor and banners told stories invisible to common eyes. A dragon, coiled around a chalice, symbolized purity through sacrifice. Wings spread across a field of black represented triumph over death. The Ouroboros, ever devouring its tail, reminded them that beginnings and endings were illusions. To serve under these signs was to accept that life itself was but a fragment of an eternal cycle. Each mark painted upon their shields was not decoration, but prayer made visible. Alchemists who later studied the Order's iconography believed the knights had borrowed from Hermetic philosophy, blending Christian faith with the search for transformation. The dragon, they argued, symbolized not destruction, but transmutation, the consuming fire through which base matter became gold and mortal spirit approached divinity. To fight as a dragon was to seek that change, to destroy impurity within and without. For many, it was both spiritual journey and unending ordeal. In the monasteries allied with the Order, monks preserved fragments of these hidden teachings. Margins of holy texts bore small illustrations of serpents intertwined with crosses, suns encircled by wings, and cryptic annotations in faded ink. Priests who studied these pages whispered of visions that came to them in candlelight, of scales glimmering like molten glass, of a voice that spoke of balance between mercy and judgment. Whether divine revelation or imagination, the line between faith and mysticism grew thin. The Brotherhood's secrecy bred fear among outsiders. Rumors accused them of dark pacts, of summoning powers no man should command. Yet those who truly served within it spoke of profound reverence. Their hidden codes were not meant to deceive, but to protect, to guard wisdom from corruption, to preserve knowledge that could be misused. The dragon's fire, if left unchecked, could destroy as easily as it could illuminate. As decades passed, the language of their symbols began to fade from memory. Yet within archives buried beneath abbeys and castles, traces of their script endured. Each sigil, each phrase, each fragment of ritual remained like embers buried beneath ash, waiting for those who dared to seek. For the Order of the Dragon, secrecy was not concealment for its own sake. It was a covenant between generations, a pact that only the worthy could inherit. Cracks began to appear within the walls of unity the Order had built. Ambition, once veiled by devotion, now showed its teeth. The dragon that had united kings and knights began to turn upon itself, its own fire consuming the edges of its wings. What had been a bond of faith became a contest of pride. The great purpose that Sigismund had forged began to erode beneath the weight of mortal desire. Rivalries between noble houses tore through the Brotherhood like lightning splitting stone. Princes who had sworn eternal loyalty began to question their obligations. Wealth, land, and influence whispered louder than the vows of brotherhood. Secret councils formed within the Order, factions plotting to steer its power toward their own ambitions. The dragon's emblem still hung upon their banners, but its meaning had grown hollow. Beneath the outward display of sanctity lurked greed and suspicion. Sigismund's death left a void that none could fill. His successors lacked both his charisma and his iron will. Without his guiding hand, the order's cohesion faltered. What had been a unified flame splintered into sparks scattered by the wind. Each region began to interpret the order's laws in its own way, twisting its symbols to justify personal conquest. What had once been a sacred fraternity of defenders now resembled a court of predators circling one another in the dark. In the courts of Eastern Europe, murmurs spread that the dragon's brotherhood had lost its soul. The once holy sigil began to appear upon the armor of mercenaries and warlords who knew little of its origin. Sacred vows became currency, traded for power. Priests who once blessed their gatherings began to denounce them as heretics cloaked in sanctimony. The sacred fire of faith was now mingled with the smoke of corruption. Vlad III observed this disintegration from his throne in Wallachia with silent fury. To him, the betrayal of the dragon's ideals was an abomination. Where others saw opportunity, he saw decay. His sense of purpose hardened into vengeance, not only against the enemies beyond his borders, but also against those within his own faith who had perverted its sanctity. The order had promised divine justice. Now it reeked of hypocrisy. In his eyes, only through terror could purity be restored. Letters between former members reveal the growing bitterness. Accusations of treachery, sorcery, and sacrilege filled the correspondence. Castles, once allied in prayer, now exchanged fire and steel. Trust disintegrated, leaving only paranoia. The very emblem that had once united Christendom's defenders became a curse upon its bearers. To display the dragon's mark now invited suspicion rather than reverence. The Church, alarmed by the chaos, sought to distance itself from the Brotherhood. Edicts were issued forbidding its rituals and condemning its secrecy. Those who continued to uphold the dragon's oaths were labeled extremists or idolaters. Records of their ceremonies were confiscated or destroyed, yet the faithful few who remained believed persecution proved their righteousness. To them, the dragon's suffering mirrored Christ's own. As years passed, the order's presence faded into shadow. Castles that once hosted its councils stood abandoned, their banners rotting upon walls overtaken by ivy. The memory of unity crumbled into legend. Yet even amid ruin, whispers persisted of hidden gatherings held by torchlight, of men and women who still traced the dragon upon parchment and skin. They met not for power, but remembrance, holding on to the last ember of the fire that had once set the world alight. Through the silence that followed, one truth lingered like smoke after battle. Every creation bears within it the seed of its own destruction. The dragon that had promised to guard the light had devoured itself in the hunger for dominion. Yet its spirit, like flame upon stone, refused to die completely. It withdrew into myth, waiting for another age to awaken its name, another heart to reignite its purpose. Morning mist rose over the forests of Wallachia, curling through the black pines like smoke from ancient fire. Villages lay hushed beneath a sky the color of iron, their people whispering prayers at dawn, unsure whether they sought mercy or strength. From these valleys a new ruler emerged, a man whose name would become both legend and warning. Vlad III, son of the dragon, returned from exile not as a captive prince, but as a sovereign forged in wrath. His crown was not granted by blood alone, it was earned through the ashes of betrayal. Years spent in Ottoman custody had shaped him into something relentless. He returned with eyes that no longer sought approval, only justice. Wallachia greeted him with both reverence and fear, for those who remembered his father saw in him the same flame, but harder, colder, refined into cruelty that served purpose. His first decrees were swift, traitors executed, alliances remade, order restored through terror. To Vlad, peace was not born of kindness, but of control. The dragon's fire within him no longer flickered, it roared. Chroniclers wrote of his discipline as if describing a force of nature. He slept little, spoke rarely, and trusted few. His soldiers followed him not out of loyalty, but out of awe. His eyes, it was said, could silence argument. His judgment arrived like divine thunder. To his mind, Wallachia was not merely land, it was his flesh, its mountains, his bones, its rivers, his blood. Any corruption within it demanded purging. When he signed decrees, he did so beneath the symbol of the dragon devouring its tail, his seal pressed deep into crimson wax that seemed almost to bleed. His campaigns against the Ottoman incursions were fought with merciless precision. Night raids turned camps into graveyards. Forests became fields of horror where stakes rose higher than the trees. To enemies, he was a demon. To his people, a savior cloaked in nightmare. Yet every act of brutality bore intention. He believed fear was the only weapon strong enough to preserve sovereignty. For every village that burned, another was spared rebellion. His name spread like wildfire through both Christian and Muslim lands, carried by terrified survivors who could scarcely speak his deeds aloud. Envoys who visited his court returned with stories that blurred the line between awe and terror. Banquets held amid impaled corpses, letters sealed with the blood of the condemned, feasts served to prove that even horror could be a form of power. Yet behind such spectacle lingered strategy. Vlad knew that reputation could fight in ways armies could not. The image of the dragon's heir, merciless and unbreakable, became his armor, protecting him from invasion as surely as the walls of any fortress. Within his private chambers, relics of his father's time remained, rings bearing the dragon, scrolls containing oaths written in faded Latin. At night, he would light candles before them, eyes reflecting the flame as if searching for meaning in its flicker. To him, his father's death had been martyrdom. The order that once promised unity had fractured, but its essence survived through him. The dragon's spirit had not died, it had taken human form. His alliances were fragile, shifting with the wind of politics. Hungary offered aid when it suited its interests, and Rome blessed his cause while fearing his cruelty. Vlad accepted both favor and condemnation with equal calm. He answered neither to church nor crown, only to the legacy of his bloodline. To betray his oath would mean to extinguish the only light left to guide him. The dragon had demanded loyalty. He gave it in excess. Letters from foreign courts began to portray him as a monster. Chronicles described rivers choked with bodies, forests turned into impromptu graveyards. Yet to those who lived beneath his rule, law and order flourished. Thieves vanished, merchants traveled safely, crops returned to the fields. It was said a golden cup could sit upon the roadside without theft. Fear had achieved what justice could not. Through terror, he forged stability. His reign was not long, but its shadow stretched across centuries. He had embodied the duality of the dragon, protector and destroyer, saint and fiend. The same fire that defended his people consumed his soul. To those who gazed upon his legacy, he appeared both blessed and cursed, as though heaven and hell had chosen him at once. When his enemies whispered his name, they spoke it as prayer and curse alike. Vlad Dracula, the son of the dragon. Centuries blurred the memory of his deeds, reshaping them through rumor and imagination. What began as history hardened into myth and myth fermented into legend. Tales of Vlad's rule passed from chronicler to peasant, from monastery to marketplace, each retelling darker than the last. Acts of strategy became cruelty, justice became bloodlust. The dragon's heir transformed from ruler to revenant in the minds of those who feared him. The world no longer remembered Vlad the Prince, it remembered Dracula the monster. In candle-lit taverns, storytellers spoke of him as an immortal spectre who rose from his grave to drink the blood of the living. They described his eyes glowing like coals, his fangs gleaming beneath the moon, his thirst unending. Peasants who once praised his protection now whispered his name only in fear. Where reason failed, imagination filled the void. His legend outgrew his humanity, shaped by centuries eager to make sense of terror too vast to explain. Scholars who studied his chronicles in later ages found contradictions everywhere. One parchment named him tyrant, another called him savior. Some portrayed him as divine instrument, others as devil incarnate. The truth, hidden between extremes, was lost to the hunger for spectacle. Stories thrive upon darkness, and Vlad's shadow was too vast to ignore. The dragon's fire had become the blood-red flame of myth. Monks who preserved ancient records often added strange footnotes, passages about miracles, omens, and unholy resurrection. In a time when faith and superstition intertwined, such writings blurred distinction between fact and fear. They described storms gathering above his tomb, wolves circling his grave, and torches flickering without wind. Each legend sought to explain why a man could wield such power, why death itself seemed insufficient to silence his name. Centuries later, wandering poets from Western Europe stumbled upon these tales. They found in them not merely horror, but fascination. The notion of an eternal prince, condemned to immortality, feeding upon life itself, captured imaginations that longed for the forbidden. When the Irish writer Bram Stoker discovered fragments of those chronicles, he found the vessel for his own creation. The dragon's mark became the devil's name. Dracul turned into Dracula. Through fiction, the echoes of history took new shape. The Impaler's fortress became the vampire's castle, his battles became feasts of blood, his defiance became damnation. What had once symbolized divine fury was transformed into eternal sin. Yet beneath the invention, a sliver of truth endured. Both Vlad and his fictional shadow were creatures of control, bound by hunger, unable to rest. One sought dominion over a nation, the other over death itself. In literature and folklore, he rose again, not as ruler but as symbol. Artists painted him with crimson eyes, scholars dissected his cruelty, audiences found in his monstrosity a strange form of seduction. The line between reverence and revulsion dissolved. Dracula became both nightmare and mirror, reflecting humanity's hidden desire to escape mortality, even at the cost of damnation. Beneath all retellings, one theme remained constant. The dragon's mark could never fade. Whether upon shield or upon soul, it endured, binding generations to the eternal struggle between holiness and hunger. The real Vlad had fought for faith. His myth now fought against it. The transformation was complete, and the legend of the dragon's heir had achieved what no mortal could: immortality. As Europe drifted toward the close of the 15th century, the fire that once bound the brotherhood dimmed. Empires shifted, kingdoms fractured, and the memory of the dragon began to sink beneath waves of new wars. The banners once raised in its honor now hung forgotten in armories. The knights who had sworn to defend faith from the encroaching East either perished in battle or vanished into obscurity. The sacred halls where vows were once spoken echoed with silence. What remained of the order splintered into regional fragments, each clinging to its own interpretation of Sigismund's dream. Without unity, its meaning dissolved. Hungary, Bohemia, and the Balkans all turned inward, preoccupied with survival rather than salvation. Chroniclers recorded fewer mentions of the dragon, and those that did often spoke of it as relic rather than living power. The brotherhood that had once walked between altar and battlefield had faded into the mist of history. Among the surviving members, a sense of melancholy took hold. Those who still wore the insignia did so quietly, more in remembrance than defiance. Their gatherings grew rare, held behind monastery walls or in the chambers of aging nobles. Rituals once performed with solemn grandeur became whispers of nostalgia. Each oath repeated in the flicker of dying candles felt less like prayer and more like farewell. The Church, wary of secret orders, erased references to the brotherhood from official records. Its symbols were absorbed into new heraldry, its rites declared outdated or suspect. Yet within this erasure lay preservation. The dragon survived not through ceremony, but through adaptation. Families descended from its knights kept fragments of its creed, mottos inscribed on rings, mottled sigils carved above gates, stories told to heirs beside winter fires. In forgotten libraries, parchment still bore its seal. Scholars who stumbled upon them centuries later mistook them for curiosities, unaware they held remnants of a forgotten movement that once stood at the heart of Europe's faith. The ink had faded, yet the words still spoke of unity, sacrifice, and eternal vigilance. Their meaning had outlasted the hands that wrote them. Walls of ruined castles in Transylvania and Hungary carried faint carvings of dragons entwined with crosses. Travelers who found them in later centuries called them pagan relics, never realizing they once represented the might of Christian knighthood. Wind and rain wore the symbols down, yet even eroded stone retained power, as if memory itself refused to die completely. In the villages that had once lain beneath the order's protection, legends persisted of wandering knights who appeared during times of danger. Cloaked figures with dragon rings were said to arrive before invasion or plague, offering guidance or warning before vanishing. Whether truth or invention, these tales kept the flame alive. The dragon no longer roared from towers but whispered through folklore. Nations rebuilt upon its forgotten foundations. Kings rose and fell. Empires replaced faith with reason, yet the essence of the order remained buried like a heartbeat beneath centuries of stone. The dragon had retreated into the shadows, but shadows have long memories. Every tale of heroism, every myth of chivalry carried faint echoes of that oath once sworn in the halls of Buddha. Faith may falter, brotherhoods may crumble, but symbols endure. The dragon had become more than an order. It had become a language of eternity, a cipher through which mankind expressed its longing to bind heaven and earth. Though its name faded from chronicles, its fire remained woven into the soul of history, waiting for the moment when someone, somewhere, would call upon it again. Moonlight draped the ruins of ancient castles where once the dragon's banners had flown. Wind swept through broken halls, whispering fragments of forgotten vows. History had long moved forward, yet beneath its steady march, echoes of the old brotherhood persisted. In their transformation from holy knights to spectral legends, the members of the Order of the Dragon achieved what few mortals ever could, immortality not of flesh, but of myth. The line between man and monster blurred, faith transmuted into folklore, and the dragon's oath twisted into something darker than its creators ever intended. Centuries of retelling turned knights into phantoms, their loyalty into obsession. The emblem of the dragon, once a symbol of divine fury, became entwined with infernal power. To peasants huddled beside their hearths, it no longer represented courage, but corruption, men who had struck pacts too perilous to comprehend. They whispered that the oath to fight serpents had bound them to the serpent itself, that their eternal fire had turned inward, consuming their souls until nothing human remained. Vlad III's name anchored these fears. The son of the dragon had left behind a legacy so shrouded in violence that imagination fed upon it like carrion. The faithful could not reconcile his sanctity with his cruelty. The superstitious explained it through the language of the supernatural. He became the nexus of two worlds, the holy and the damned. Through him, the memory of the order was preserved, reshaped by fear, into a story of the undead, of immortality purchased with blood. In the centuries that followed, storytellers across Europe embroidered his legend until it bore little resemblance to truth. They claimed the dragon's oath granted eternal life, that those who swore it could not die as ordinary men. Instead, their spirits wandered through the night, drinking from the living to sustain their cursed existence. Priests spoke of divine punishment, philosophers of moral allegory, but among the common folk, such distinctions mattered little. They believed the dragon's sons had become creatures of twilight, neither alive nor dead, forever thirsting for redemption. The Church's denunciation of the order only fueled this transformation. Where faith once sanctified the brotherhood, condemnation gave rise to myth. To the medieval imagination, secrecy equaled sorcery, and silence became evidence of guilt. The dragon, once a guardian of heaven, descended into hell. Its coiled form, eternal and consuming, mirrored the image of the serpent that had tempted Eden. The line between sacred fire and infernal flame vanished beneath centuries of suspicion. By the age of reason, poets and philosophers had stripped away faith's language, yet retained fascination for darkness. The dragon's tale evolved once more, this time into art, into metaphor, into the birth of the vampire. The knight who had sworn to protect humanity became the creature that preyed upon it. The blood spilled in the name of faith now sustained eternal hunger. In this metamorphosis lay a deeper truth. Humanity's reverence for its heroes is never separate from its fear of them. The figure of the vampire carried within it all the contradictions of the order, loyalty turned into obsession, purity transfigured into sin, light forever shadowed by darkness. It was no longer merely the story of Vlad or his kin, but of mankind's unending battle with its own nature. Each retelling whispered that the quest for immortality, whether through faith or power, demanded a cost that no soul could afford to pay. The dragon's fire still burned, but it now illuminated the abyss. By the time Bram Stoker penned his novel centuries later, the transformation was complete. The knight's oath had become a curse, the symbol of divine duty had become a sigil of predation. The order of the dragon lived on through Dracula, an immortal reflection of mankind's dual hunger, for righteousness and for eternity. The knight and the vampire were one and the same, both seekers of endless life, both condemned by their desire to transcend what it means to be human. Across Europe's hills and valleys, legends of dragons lingered long before the order's birth. To the ancient mind, the dragon was not merely a beast, but a living embodiment of cosmic balance, destruction, and renewal woven into one form. When the knights of the 15th century adopted the creature as their symbol, they tapped into something primal, already rooted in human consciousness. Their emblem did not create the myth, it merely awakened it. In the frozen north, sagas spoke of worms coiled beneath mountains, guarding gold that burned the hands of thieves. In the misty valleys of the British Isles, tales told of dragons slain by saints, creatures of chaos subdued by divine courage. Among the Slavic peoples, however, the dragon often held a different nature. It was not solely evil, but a force to be respected, a guardian of Earth's secrets, a keeper of storms. The Order's founders, perhaps unknowingly, had chosen a creature that mirrored their own complexity. The circular dragon devouring its tail appeared in manuscripts and alchemical treatises centuries before Sigismund's coronation. To the mystics of Europe, it symbolized eternity, the unity of opposites, the cycle of life and death. By placing this symbol upon their seals, the knights aligned themselves with an idea far older than Christianity, that existence itself is a constant act of transformation. Their dragon was not a mere emblem of war, but of rebirth, a reminder that to guard the sacred, one must also confront the monstrous within. Folklore carried these meanings through generations, reshaping them to fit each age's fears and hopes. Villagers told of dragons sleeping beneath rivers, of fires that rose from caves when injustice ruled too long. In some tales, dragons demanded tribute. In others, they protected the innocent. Whether guardian or destroyer, the creature represented the unseen forces that governed fate. The peasants who saw the dragon on the Order's banners may have trembled, but they also felt awe, sensing the power of something older than kings. Bards sang of heroes who faced the beast not merely with swords, but with purity of heart. Their victories symbolized humanity's triumph over sin, pride, and chaos. Yet in every story there was also warning. To slay the dragon was to risk becoming it. The line between conqueror and consumed blurred, as if the act of wielding power against darkness required the acceptance of a shadow within oneself. The Knights of the Dragon knew this intimately, for their lives embodied that paradox. As centuries passed, the symbol migrated from banners to books, from faith to art. Renaissance painters adorned chapel walls with dragons writhing at the feet of saints, while philosophers debated whether the creature represented evil or enlightenment. Alchemists saw in its form the eternal cycle of transformation, lead into gold, flesh into spirit, mortality into transcendence. The dragon was no longer beast alone, it was philosophy given wings. In remote villages of Transylvania, mothers still told stories of fiery serpents seen at dusk streaking across the sky like living comets. These were not omens of doom, but signs that the old spirits had not vanished. To children listening by the fire, the dragon remained both fear and comfort, death and protection, punishment and promise. Its presence connected them to the deep memory of their ancestors, to an age when every flame carried meaning. When the Order's history faded into dust, its symbol endured in the minds of common folk. It appeared carved into wood, embroidered upon wedding garments, painted on shields hung above hearths. Each iteration softened the creature's menace while preserving its majesty. Through folklore, the dragon transcended religion and kingdom alike, becoming a mirror for humanity's unending desire to understand its own dual nature. Rain falls upon the ruins of fortresses where the dragon once watched over kingdoms. Walls crumble, yet beneath layers of moss and time, faint carvings remain. Curved tails, outstretched wings, eyes half erased but still burning in spirit. Historians, tracing their fingers across the stone, feel more than texture. They feel pulse, memory, defiance. Every mark upon those ancient walls speaks of an era when men believed faith could reshape destiny. In the archives of forgotten monasteries, brittle manuscripts rest like sleeping relics. Pages bear seals pressed with dragon sigils, their ink faded but legible enough to whisper secrets. Scholars who have studied these relics speak of strange unease, as if the words themselves retain life. Margins are filled with cryptic notes, Latin prayers interwoven with symbols of alchemy and celestial geometry. Each page is a fragment of a greater riddle, a puzzle linking heaven earth, and fire. Bloodlines that once bore the dragon's mark have scattered across continents, their heraldry absorbed into modern coats of arms. Yet within certain families, traditions persist, phrases recited before battle, medallions passed from father to son, dreams in which a winged serpent coils around a burning crown. Whether superstition or inheritance, the connection remains, intangible yet undeniable. History, it seems, has a way of sleeping lightly. In Transylvania, ruins of castles stand silent against mountain winds. Travelers who visit them at dusk speak of strange sensations, cold air that feels like breath, flickers of light within shattered towers. Local guides claim it is only the weather, though their eyes tell a different story. Legends linger because they find willing listeners, and the stones themselves seem eager to speak. Beneath their cracks, the echo of the dragon's oath still hums. Churches built upon older foundations sometimes reveal hidden carvings when plaster falls away. Behind saints and angels, outlines of serpents appear, coiling in quiet defiance. These remnants are not accidents. They are remnants of a time when faith and mystery were intertwined, when the holy could not exist without the haunted. To erase the dragon was to erase part of the divine itself, and so the symbol persisted in secret, embedded in the architecture of belief. Among collectors of ancient relics, rings bearing the Order's crest occasionally resurface. Their origins are rarely traceable, yet their presence commands silence. To hold one is to feel history pressing against the skin, as if the metal remembers its purpose. Those who possess such artifacts often describe vivid dreams, visions of firelit halls, voices reciting oaths in Latin, the faint scent of incense and blood. Whether imagination or invocation, the dragon's shadow proves stubbornly alive. In museums across Europe, scholars study banners and manuscripts once thought lost. Each discovery reignites curiosity about the brotherhood that shaped both history and myth. Yet even the most meticulous research cannot dispel the atmosphere of reverence that surrounds these relics. They are not merely objects, but thresholds, openings into a world where symbols commanded nations and faith could bend the course of empires. Every ruin, every crest, every lingering legend stands as testimony that nothing sacred ever vanishes completely. It changes shape, language, and purpose, but its essence endures. The dragon carved into stone, the dragon whispered in bloodline, the dragon painted upon faded tapestry, all speak the same unending truth. Once invoked, it never truly sleeps. Night falls softly upon the modern world, yet the echoes of the past continue to stir beneath its surface. Streets paved with steel and glass still carry the same pulse that once beat through medieval stone. Humanity believes it has escaped the age of symbols, but deep within its collective memory, the dragon waits. Every story of power, every fascination with immortality, every yearning for transcendence traces its roots back to that sacred fire first kindled in the halls of Buddha. Writers, artists, and dreamers have carried the Order's flame into the present age. Their works, though clothed in fiction, continue the same quest for meaning that drove the knights of old. The modern fascination with Dracula, with eternal life and unending night, is but a reflection of that ancient hunger to defy death. The dragon's legacy lives through imagination as vividly as it once lived through armor and blood. In the world's collective mythology, dragons and vampires share a single origin, the struggle between the divine and the forbidden, the yearning to wield power without being consumed by it. The knight who bore the dragon upon his shield and the immortal who stalks by moonlight both seek mastery over mortality. They differ only in form, not in essence. Each bears the mark of fire that promises eternity and threatens damnation. Within libraries and digital archives, the Order's surviving symbols still intrigue scholars who see in them a code of human aspiration. To fight darkness, to embrace transformation, to stand between the sacred and the profane, these are not relics of medieval faith, but truths that endure. The dragon's circle, once traced in wax and gold, now circles within the human psyche, unbroken. Every culture that inherited fragments of this legend found its own way to express it. Eastern traditions painted dragons as bringers of rain and wisdom. Western faith cast them as foes of saints. Yet beneath the contrast lies unity, the belief that power must be met with balance, that creation and destruction dance eternally. The knights who swore to the dragon's creed understood this duality, though they could not escape its consequences. In the quiet hours of night, when the modern world hums with electric silence, imagination turns again to the ancient fires. The figure of Dracula staring from novels and films is not merely a villain, he is memory incarnate. Through him, the lost brotherhood breathes once more, clothed in new myth yet bound to its origin. The dragon's promise that no fire truly dies finds its fulfillment in every retelling, every dream that dares to seek eternity. The true immortality of the Order lies not in surviving bloodlines or crumbling relics, but in the ideas it left behind. To fight for faith, to confront the darkness within, to seek transformation even through pain, these are legacies no passage of time can erase. The dragon may no longer blaze upon banners, yet it glows within every heart that yearns for purpose greater than itself. When the last torch flickered in the halls of the Brotherhood, it did not extinguish, it passed into story. And story, as ever, defies death. The dragon coils still, not beneath mountains or ruins, but within the imagination of humankind, a guardian of all that refuses to fade. Those who listen carefully can still hear its whisper. Once you bear the mark, its fire remains forever. Night descends upon the ancient lands once more. A pale moon rises over the forests and ruins that have stood witness to the passing of centuries. Wind drifts through the broken gates of forgotten fortresses, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth, the quiet breath of history itself. Beneath that timeless sky, the story of the dragon lingers, not as fire and fury, but as memory. The knights who once swore their vows beneath torches and stone have long turned to dust, yet the echo of their purpose still hums beneath the soil. Across the mountains of Transylvania, mist gathers like a shroud. The rivers wind through valleys that once heard the clash of swords and the chanting of prayers. Villages sleep, their rooftops silver beneath moonlight, unaware that beneath their foundations lie bones of warriors who believed they served eternity. If one listens closely, the night carries faint murmurs, a Latin phrase spoken softly by wind through leaves, a distant echo of the oath that bound men to dragon fire. Legends are never buried completely. They rest in the collective dream of humankind, waiting to rise when the world once again hungers for meaning. The dragon has slept for centuries, coiled beneath the layers of myth and time, its fire banked but unextinguished. Whenever humanity reaches too far into darkness, the symbol awakens in new form, sometimes as faith, sometimes as fear, always as reminder. Power, once granted, never vanishes, it merely changes shape. Stars drift above the ruins, their cold light reflected in rivers where once knights washed the blood of battle from their hands. Each spark in the heavens mirrors a soul that once burned for faith, each shimmer an echo of a vow whispered in sacred secrecy. The story of the Order is not one of simple glory or tragedy. It is a meditation on the human longing for transcendence, the desire to hold light in a world made of shadow. The dragon sleeps, yet its dreams are our own. In the heart of every legend lies a reflection of those who tell it. The knights who once fought for divine purpose mirror the same struggles carried by modern hearts. The fight against fear, the hunger for immortality, the search for meaning in chaos. Every generation reshapes the dragon's form, whether in stone, ink, or imagination. It is both guardian and mirror, showing us what we are and what we might become if we let the fire consume us. Somewhere in the silence of night, the ancient creature exhales, and the wind stirs through the forest once more. Its presence is not gone, it merely watches. Beneath the calm surface of history, it waits for those who still listen, to the call of courage, to the whisper of mystery, to the eternal promise of transformation. The dragon's body may sleep, but its eyes remain open, gazing through the ages with patient wisdom. And as the last candle flickers, the story circles back to its beginning. The dragon coils around itself once more, tail meeting mouth, forming the eternal loop of existence. Creation within destruction, death within life, faith within doubt. The Order's knights are gone, yet their symbol endures, woven into the world's collective soul. It burns quietly in every heart that refuses to surrender to despair, every dream that seeks something greater than flesh or fame. So let the fire rest now. Let the listener drift into the silence where stories meet sleep, where history becomes dream and dream becomes truth. The dragon breathes softly beneath the veil of centuries, not dead, not forgotten, merely waiting. And as you close your eyes, imagine that ancient emblem glowing faintly in the dark, a promise that courage and mystery will always return when the world grows cold. The dragon sleeps, but its fire, like the soul of mankind, never fades. If you felt the pull of this story, if the whispers of history and legend stirred something within you, then carry the flame forward. Subscribe to the channel so that you never miss another journey into the hidden corners of time. Like this film if its atmosphere drew you into the ancient night, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell which part of the legend spoke to you most deeply. Let others feel the same wonder by sharing this video with friends and family so that the story of the dragon's fire may continue to burn in new hearts.